Hello, everyone. On this occasion, we would like to share about our presentation about the political economy of international trade. First of all, we would like to introduce ourselves, uh, Angela Dewi, Muhammad Royhan Akbar, and Tamara, Gracia, Rettauli. Next. Okay, first of all, we would like to identify the policy instrument used by governments to influence international trade flows. Next. There are approximately 6 components we would like to discuss about tariffs, subsidies, import quotas, voluntary export restraint, anti-dumping, and local content requirements. Next. Okay, first we would like to discuss about tariff. A tariff is a tax levied on import or exports. There are 2 kinds of tariff, specific tariff and ad valorem tariff. Import tariff reduce the overall efficiency of the world economy, and export tariff objective are to raise revenue for the government and reduce export from a particular sectors. And then the second one, subsidies. A subsidy is a government payment to a domestic producer. It's a form of subsidy are cash grants, low interest loans, tax breaks, and government equity participation in domestic firms. Subsidies help domestic producer in competing against foreign imports and gaining export markets. Next. Okay, the third one is import quota. An import quota is a direct restriction on the quantity of some goods that may be imported into a country. Tariff rate quota is a common hybrid of a quota and a tariff. For example, in the right figure is the figure of the tariff rate quota. And the third one is a voluntary export restraint, or VER, is a quota trade imposed by the exporting country. For example, on 1981, US fair limited Japanese imports to no more than 168 million vehicles per year. And quota rent is a profit gain from limited supply. Next. Next one is local content requirement. The definition is a requirement that some specific fraction of a good be produced domestically, consists of the physical terms or value terms by on domestic. Local content regulation provide protection for a domestic producer. And the next one is anti-dumping policies. Anti-dumping policies are designed to punish foreign firms that engage in dumping by adding some tariffs. The next one is a countervailing. Countervailing duties is an export subsidy given by foreign country government to their exporters. And then export subsidies given by the Chinese government will make the Chinese product low price in the Indian market. Is the example of export subsidies. Okay, next.
Okay, next I will explain about development of the world trading system. First of all, we go into from Smith to the Great Depression. So the theoretical case for free trade dates to the late 18th century and the work of Adam Smith and David Ricardo. But when the British Parliament repealed the Corn Laws in 1846, it became the first country to embrace free trade as a government policy. And the British attempt to simulate free trade had been buried beneath the economic rubble of the Great Depression by the 1930s. And the Great Depression had roots in the failure of the world economy to mount a sustained economic recovery after the end of World War I in 1918. And things got worse in the 1929 with the US stock market collapse and the subsequent run on the US banking system. Economic problems were compounded in 1930 when the United States Congress passed the Smooth-Hawley Tariff, which aimed to prevent rising unemployment in protecting domestic industries and diverting consumer demand away from foreign products. And we move to GATT, trade liberation and economic growth. So the GATT, a multilateral agreement designed to gradually eliminate barriers to trade, was created in 1947 under the leadership of the United States, following their victory in World War II alongside the Allied powers. And the GATT's membership rose from 19 to more than 120 countries from 1947 until it was superseded by the WTO. And in its early years, the GATT was by most measures very successful. And for example, the average tariff declined by nearly 92% in the US between the Geneva round of 1947 and the Tokyo round of 1973 until 1979. Okay, next, we enter the year 1980 until 1993. Protectionist trends. The World Trading System established by the GATT came under strain in the 1980s and early 1990s as pressures for more protectionism grew around the world, which led to an increase in such pressures in 1980s, which was caused by three factors. The first one is Japan's perceived protectionist policies that put other countries under a lot of political pressure. So by the early 1980s, however, Japan had become the world's second largest economy and it's a larger exporter. And the widespread perception in the West that despite low tariff rates and subsidies, made Japanese markets closed to imports and foreign investment by administrative trade barriers. And the second one is the persistent trade deficit in the world's largest economy. The United States included painful adjustment in industries such as automobiles, machine tools, semiconductors, steel, and textiles, where domestic producers steadily lost market share to foreign competitors, and this resulted in widespread unemployment. And the last reason is that many countries found ways to get around GATT regulations, which leads in increasing in the use of non-tariff barriers. Okay, next, I will explain about the Uruguay round and the World Trade Organization. So the Uruguay round, which was the most challenging of the GATT's 8 rounds of tariff reduction discussions, began in 1986, and the Uruguay round dragged on for 7 years before ending on December 15, 1993, with a deal. And on July 1, 1995, it became effective. And the following clauses were included in the Uruguay round. And the first one is tariffs on industrial goods were to be reduced by more than 1/3, and tariffs were to be scrapped on more than 40% of manufactured goods. The second one is average tariffs rates imposed by developed nations on manufactured goods were to be reduced to less than 4% of value, the lowest level in the modern history. The third one is agricultural subsidies were to be substantially reduced. And the fourth one is GATT fair trade and market access rules were to be extended to cover a wide range of services. And the fifth one is GATT rules also were to be extended to provide exchange protection for patents, copyrights, and trademarks. And the sixth one is barriers on trade in textiles were to be significantly reduced over 10 years. And the last one is the World Trade Organization was to be created to implement the GATT agreement. Besides, actually, the Uruguay round focusing on two things. The first one is services and intellectual property, addressing trade challenges linked to services and intellectual property in addition to manufactured products. And the second one is the World Trade Organization, where enforcement methods were supposed to make the WTO a more effective enforcer of global trade laws. The next point is WTO experience today. The first one is WTO as global police. The WTO's policing and enforcement mechanisms are having a positive effect, and many countries have adopted the WTO's recommendations and are using the WTO represents an important vote of confidence in the organization dispute resolution procedures. And the second one is expanding trade agreements. Besides being successful in getting the role of brokering future agreements to open up global trade and services after successful negotiation in Uruguay round, GATT widens its reach in foreign direct investment regulations, especially in the global telecommunication and financial services industries. And the last one is the WTO in Seattle, a watershed. At the end of November 1999, representatives from the WTO's member states met in Seattle, Washington, and the talks ended in December 3, 1999, without any agreement being reached because of the inability to reach consensus on the primary goals for the next round of talks. And this leads to various groups that took advantage of the Seattle meetings to protesting, voice their opposition, such as arguing that lower tariffs on imports of lumber from developing nations will stimulate demand and accelerate the rate at which virgin forests are logged.
So next, I want to tell about future of the WTO, unresolved issues, and Doha round. Next. So the first unresolved issues is anti-dumping action. There is a WTO rules that allow countries to impose anti-dumping duties on foreign goods that are being sold cheaper than at home or below their cost of production when domestic producers can show that they are being harmed. As you can see in the picture, from 1995 to 2009, there is a couple of countries that already reported the implementation of anti-dumping actions. India initiated the largest number of anti-dumping actions, like about 613, followed by Europe in the second place and United States in the third place. So anti-dumping action seems to be concentrated in certain sectors, such as basic metals industries like aluminum and steel, chemicals, plastic and machinery, and electrical equipment. Countries were using anti-dumping action as a means of protecting domestic producers, and the most frequent target of these actions was China. Next. The second unsolved problem is protectionism in agriculture. There is another recent focus on of WTO about high level of tariff and subsidies in the agricultural sectors of many economies. There is a problem that tariff rates on agricultural products are generally much higher than tariff on manufactured products or services. For example, like as you can see in the table, in middle 2000s, the average tariff rates on non-agricultural products were 4.2% for Canada, 3.8% for European, 3.9% for Japan, and 40.4% for United States. On agricultural products, the average tariff rates were to 21.2% for Canada, 15.9% for European, 18.6% for Japan, and 10.3% for United States. Consumers are paying higher prices for agricultural products, which leaves them with less money to spend on other goods. But the other hand, high tariff rates on agricultural products reflect a desire to protect domestic agriculture and traditional farming communities from foreign competition and also benefit from substantial subsidies. There is an argues from WTO that removing tariff barriers and subsidies could significantly boost the overall level of trade, lower prices to consumers, and raise global economic growth by freeing consumption and investment resources for more productive uses. In the other words, that free trade in agriculture could help to jumpstart economic growth among the world poorer nations and alleviate global poverty. Well, next. And the third is protecting intellectual property. Another issue that has become increasingly important to the WTO has been protecting intellectual property. WTO has been protecting intellectual property, um, the trade-related aspect of intellectual property rights or TRIPS regulation oblige WTO members to grant and enforce patents lasting at least 20 years and copyright lasting 50 years. Rich countries had to comply with the rules within a year, but poor countries in which such protection generally was much weaker had 5 years grace and the very poorest had 10 years. The basis for this agreement was a strong belief among signatory nations that the protection of intellectual property through patents, trademarks, and copyrights must be an essential element of international trading system. The fourth is country had to comply with the rules within. Although most developed nations have brought their tariff rates on industrial products down to an average of 3.8% of value, exceptions still remain. While average tariffs are low, high tariff rates persist on certain imports into developed nations, which limit market access and economic growth. Like, for example, in Australia, 15.1% and South Korea to 24.6%. The WTO would like to bring down tariff rates on import of non-agricultural goods into developing nations. The ultimate aim is to reduce tariff rates to zero. And then the last is a new round of talks, Doha. The WTO launched a new round of talks at Doha in Qatar in 2001. The agenda is include cutting tariff on industrial goods and services, phasing out subsidies to agricultural product producers, reducing barrier to cross-border investment, and the last is limiting the use of anti-dumping laws. Next.
Okay, next we enter the study case about trade in textiles, holding the Chinese juggernaut in check. So the first question is, was the removal of MFA a positive thing for the world economy? Why? And based on our group discussion, our answer is no, since it resulted in a dominance of international textile commerce by countries that can trade at a cheaper cost, such as China, which was detrimental to more developed countries' domestic trade industries. And it also facilitates the transition of countries to a more open trading economy by lowering trade barriers. And because of its competitive advantage, low wage and productive workforce, economies of scale, solid infrastructure, and reliable delivery and obligation, China will monopolize the industry if MFA is removed. And the second question is, as a producer in a developing nation that benefits from MFA agreement, how should we respond to the expression of the agreement? And our answer is, To prepare for the expiration of the MFA agreement, the local textile sector should seek government approval to put tariffs on imported textiles from China in order to acquire market share in the domestic market. And it also adopts a balanced strategy in which the country must engage the WTO not only to obtain an allocation of export quotas, but also to acquire access to new markets for the local textile industry.
Okay. The third question is, do you think China was right to place a tariff on export of textiles from China? Why does such action help or harm the world economy? So, according to the paragraph, China is being cornered by trade association from more than 50 textile producing nations that signed the Istanbul Declaration in 2004. They asked the WTO to delay the removal of quotas. In addition, the tariff given by China's government are modest, ranging from 2.4 to 6 cents per item, with most at the low end of the range. As an illustration, the first 8 months of 2005 gave us a sneak peek at what was to come. Import of China textile into the United States increased by 64% to 15.4 billion over the same time in 2004. So, in conclusion, the application of export tariff by China's government did not significantly impact the dominance of textile by China. Next. Okay, the fourth question is, whose interests were served by the November 2005 agreement between the United States and China to limit the growth of China's textile imports into the United States? Do you think the agreement was a good one for the United States? So they came to deal in which the increase of China imports into the United States would be controlled at roughly 15% per year through 2008. The agreements gave 2 points. First, China export quota in textile being controlled by the US in some way. They will stop growing, but they also have the certainty to dominate the market by 15%. The second point is, other textile exporters have a chance to compete in the market. So our personal opinion is that US textiles needs will still be met, but not dominated by China. As described in the paragraph above, China has a faster process in delivery and guaranteed quality. Next.
So the last question is, what kind of trade barrier was erected by the November 2005 agreement between China and the United States? So the answer is imported quotas. According to the last paragraph, in middle 2005, the Chinese entered into bilateral negotiation with the United States to limit imports of Chinese textiles. They reached an agreement that kept the growth in Chinese imports into the United States at around 15% per annum.
Okay, thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.